April 1883. Hannah Ainsley laid $43.11 on the polished counter of the Cottonwood Mercantile Bank and said she had come to bury her father's debt, and the clerk behind the glass turned a page and told her the debt was already gone. Not paid. Gone. Settled 6 weeks earlier, the clerk said, by a hand that was not hers and a name she had never written, in a ledger she had never seen. Hannah did not move. She had ridden 11 days from the railhead at Sweetwater with that money sewn into the lining of her charcoal gray coat, and now the clerk was telling her there was nothing left to count. She put one gloved finger on the counter very lightly, as if to keep the floor from tilting. "Read it to me again," she said. The clerk was a narrow fellow named Orville Pike, ink on his cuffs and a smile he had not earned, who liked the sound of his own knowing. He spun the great leather-bound ledger so the cracked spine faced her and ran his nail down the debts and credits until it stopped on a line in a careful, slanting hand. "Ainsley, account closed," Orval read. "Balance forgiven against marriage settlement. See entry March the 9th. Then he looked up, and the smile widened, and he said the thing that would follow her down every plank walk in Cottonwood for a month. "You're the debt girl, the one who's already promised and don't even know it." The two old men playing checkers by the cold stove laughed into their collars. A woman pricing thread near the window went still and listening. Under the checker table, an old blue heeler, the bank's mouser, half blind and gray at the muzzle, lifted its head off its paws, not at the laughter, but at her, reading the room by something the people in it could not yet smell. And Hannah Ainsley, who had buried her father in February and sold his plow and his good rifle to make this trip, felt the whole low-ceilinged room lean in to watch what she would do. She did the thing nobody expected. She did not weep, and she did not shout for the manager. She turned the ledger the rest of the way around, set both palms flat on its open pages, and began to read it herself, slowly, line by line, the way her father had taught her to read a seed contract before signing, because the trap is never in the loud print. You can't just— Orval started. "I can read," Hannah said, not looking up. "He taught me that before he taught me my prayers." She found the entry. March the 9th, 1883. Ainsley debt, $81.40, forgiven in full upon the marriage of Hannah Ainsley, spinster of Sweetwater County, to— and there, the careful hand had written a name she had never heard spoken in her life. Thomas Renfrew, witnessed and entered. Below it, in the column where the borrower signed, was a signature. It was her name, Hannah Ainsley, in a looping, confident script with the little crossed flourish she put on the final letter. The flourish her mother had taught her, the one she had used on exactly nothing in this town because she had never set foot in it until this morning. Somebody had signed her name. Somebody who knew how she signed it. She felt the cold come up off the floorboards then, real as river water, climbing past her boots and her knees, and it was not the spring chill leaking under the door. It was the cold of a thing arranged in the dark, around her, without her, while she sat 11 days away counting coins she would never need to spend. The old heeler rose then, stiff in the hips, and it had not stirred for Orval Pike, or the thread woman, or the laughing checker men. It crossed the plank floor, pressed its head against Hannah's skirt, and stayed there, leaning, the way an animal leans on the one person in a room it has decided is true. The Thread Woman noticed. Old men notice when the dog chooses. This channel is full of these women, the ones a whole town reads wrong in a single morning, the dismissed and the written off, who turn out to be the steadiest hand in the county. If you came for a story about one of them, follow along, because Hannah Ainsley is about to do something a forged ledger never accounted for. "Whose hand is this?" Hannah said. Not a question. A demand laid flat on the counter beside her $43. Orval's smile had thinned. "Mr. Greaves keeps the marriage entries himself." "Then I'll see Mr. Greaves." "Mr. Greaves don't see walk-ins," Orval said, finding the script he liked better. He leaned forward on the counter the way men do when they think a closed door's a kind of weapon. "And I'd think hard about making noise, dat girl. A woman with no kin, no man, no money worth the counting, hollerin' forgery against the bank that holds half this valley's paper. Folks remember a woman like that as trouble. You want to be trouble in a town where you don't know one soul? Or take your $43 back out that door and go on home?" "I buried my home in February," Hannah said. She did not raise her voice. She closed the ledger gently, the way you close a thing that has bitten you so it cannot bite again. "And I'll trouble whoever I please until somebody tells me to my face who wrote my name. You can be that somebody, or fetch the man who can. But I'm not walking out that door, Mr. Pike. And the longer you stand between me and that office, the more these good people are going to wonder why a clerk's so frightened of a question." The Thread Woman had not bought any thread. The checker men had forgotten their game. Orval looked at the room, and the room looked back at him, and that was a different kind of arithmetic than the one in his ledger. He came out from behind the glass. "Wait here," he said, and the swagger was gone from it. The office at the back of the bank had a door of good Eastern walnut and a brass plate that read, "Silas Greaves, President," and behind the desk sat a silver-haired man in a black frock coat who did not rise when she came in. He had the soft, clean hands of a man who had never broken sod, and a voice like oil, poured slow. "Miss Ainsley," he said, "I've been expecting you 6 weeks, near enough. Sit." "I'll stand. There's a name in your book I never wrote." "Then you'll have come about the marriage." "I've come about the forgery." "I know of no forgery," Greaves said pleasantly. "I know of a settlement, signed and witnessed and entered." "Then you'll know," Hannah said, "that I never signed your ledger." "I know," said Silas Greaves, "that your father did." And that was the thing that took the legs out from under her anger and left her standing in the wreckage of it. Because she could believe a stranger had forged her name. She could fight a forgery. What she could not yet fight was the possibility that her own father, in the last sick winter of his life, had sold her hand across a desk like this one to settle a winter's worth of debt and signed her name for her, because she would not have signed it herself. She sat down in the hard chair across from him without being asked. The blue heeler had followed her to the office door and lay down across the threshold, watching the banker, and did not wag. "You're surprised," Greaves observed, watching her face the way a card player watches a hand. "You shouldn't be. Your father came to me in January in the worst of his fever and begged me, a proud man does not beg twice, to forgive the debt before he died, so it would not follow you. I told him a marriage settlement discharges a debt cleaner than any payment. He took the pen himself. I did not guide his hand. You let a dying man sign his daughter into a marriage he invented. I offered a sick man the only door I had, and he walked through it grateful. That is not a crime. That is mercy, with paperwork. It was a good story, so good she understood he had told it before, to himself, until it shone. Her father had taught her that a man who explains his own goodness at length is selling something, and Silas Greaves was explaining at length. Hannah Ainsley had grown up 40 acres outside Sweetwater on land that grew more rock than wheat. The only child of a man who could fix any broken thing but his own luck. Her mother had died when Hannah was 9, of a fever that took half the county, and after that it had been the two of them, the man and the girl, working the thin ground and reading by one lamp at night to save oil. He had taught her sums because a woman cheated at the scale dies poor. He had taught her to read a contract because a woman who signs what she cannot read deserves what she gets. And he had said it kindly, which was how she knew he meant it. None of that had prepared her for the chair she now sat in, but it had prepared her not to take a polished story at its shine. My father owed you $81.40, she said. I have $43.11 and a note from the bank at Sweetwater, good for the rest by autumn. I came to pay it. Tear up your marriage entry and take my money. Silas Greaves folded his soft hands. The debt is discharged, Miss Ainsley. There is nothing to pay. The terms were a marriage, not money, and the marriage stands on my books whether or not you care to honor it. A signed entry is the law out here. We have no courthouse nearer than 90 miles, and the man who keeps the ledger keeps the truth. You keep the ledger. I do, he said, and almost smiled. Then tear out the marriage and let me ride home, Hannah said, and we're square. A forgiven debt, a closed account, my face gone from your office forever. That's the simplest thing in the world, Mr. Greaves. Why won't you do it? For 1/2 second, the oil stopped pouring. She saw it. A stillness in the soft hands, a flicker behind the silver-framed calm. Then it was gone, and he leaned back with the patience of a man who has all the deeds and all the days. Because the entry is lawful, and I don't tear lawful things out of my books on the request of a girl who rode in this morning, go home, mourn your father, be grateful, and be gone. But she had seen the flicker, and you cannot unsee a flicker. The debt was the small print. Something else was the loud one, and he had built his whole pleasant story to keep her eyes on the wrong line. If you have ever stood in a room where a powerful man explained calmly that he owned a fact about your life that you did not own yourself, you already know the particular silence that filled that office. Hannah let it fill. Then she asked the only question that mattered, the one she would carry out of that building and into the long, strange month ahead. Who is Thomas Renfrew? And why does a man I have never met want my name in your book? Greaves did not answer that. He told her, instead, that Thomas Renfrew held the deed to 400 acres of creek bottom that bordered her father's rocky 40, the only water for 9 miles, and that the Ainsley debt had been bought up cheap, the way a man buys a key because he wants the house. And rising to show her the door, he told her Renfrew lived a day's ride north at a place called Iron Springs, and she was welcome to go meet her husband if she did not believe the books. One more thing, Miss Ainsley. He had his hand on the walnut door. I am a patient man, and patience always collects. Ride north if it eases you. But the day comes, soon, when every line in that ledger settles itself, and there is not one thing a girl with $43 can do to stop a number from coming due. He opened the door. "Good morning." So she went. There was nothing in Cottonwood for her but a sneer and a lie and a man too smooth to trust. And she was not the kind to sit in a hotel and weep over a closed account. She bought a steady bay mare on the last of credit her father's good name could still buy, and she rode north out of town with the blue heeler trotting at the mare's heel, because the dog had simply decided, and no one in the bank had the standing to argue with it. I want to stop here, before the road north, because this is the part of Hannah Ainsley's story I have wanted to tell you from the first line. And if you have come this far with her, hit the subscribe button now, because what she found at Iron Springs is not what the ledger promised, and it is not what you are expecting either. The land at Iron Springs was the most beautiful she had ever seen, and the man who held its deed was dying. She smelled the place before she saw it, wild plum in bloom and good water, the green, wet smell of a creek that ran year-round, 400 acres of bottom grass deep enough to hide a calf, fenced in cedar rail, with a low stone house at the center and not one hand working it. The fields were going to seed. A wagon sat half-loaded and abandoned by the barn, and on the porch, wrapped in 3 blankets in the warm April sun, sat a young man so thin and so gray that for one moment she took him for an old one. Thomas Renfrew was perhaps 32. He had been broad once. She could see it in the frame the sickness was emptying. He watched her ride up with eyes that were still sharp in the wasted face, and when she stopped the mare at the foot of his steps, he spoke first, and what he said was not what a man says to a stranger. "You sign your H the same as your father drew it for me," he said. He was proud of that. "Said you had a fine hand." Hannah sat very still in the saddle. "You knew my father." "I loved your father," Thomas Renfrew said simply. "He was the only man in this country who'd sit with me after the doctors quit coming. Get down, Miss Ainsley. You've ridden a long way to be lied to, and I'd rather you heard it true from me." She got down. The dog went up the steps and lay against the dying man's chair as if it had always lived there. "That's Greaves's dog," Thomas said, looking at the healer. "The bank's mouser. Followed you all the way out from town. It chose me. I didn't ask it to." "No, they never do. That dog's smarter than the man who feeds it." He reached down with a thin hand, and the healer leaned into it, and for a moment the dying man and the half-blind dog were the only easy thing on that whole quiet place. "Sit, Miss Ainsley. There's a chair. My mother's, but she won't mind." The truth came out slow over that first afternoon, on the porch, in the long honey light, the creek talking somewhere below the green. He told it in the spaces between coughs, and she did not rush him, because her father had died the same slow way, and she knew the kindness of letting a man take the road at his own pace. "I'm the last of my name," Thomas told her when she asked who else would speak for him. "No wife, no child, no brother to write to, just me, and 400 acres of the best water in this county, and a cough that's already spent half of me. And the man at the bank holds a note on it. On all of it." He turned his head toward the green fields. "Greaves loaned against Iron Springs 3 years back, when my father died. The note comes due the day I do. The moment he has the water, your father's rocky 40 is worth nothing. Rock without water never was worth $1 an acre, and Greaves has known that longer than either of us." "Then why my name?" Hannah said. "Why a marriage, and not just the 2 notes?" "Because 2 notes is 2 foreclosures, and a hard look from any honest judge. 1 marriage settlement, joining both parcels, is a single clean line he can close in an afternoon." He coughed into a gray cloth and folded it away before she could see it. "He came to me last winter and offered to forgive your father's debt if I'd let him enter a marriage between us on the books. I told him no. I'd not have a girl I'd never met dragged into my dying for his bookkeeping, but he didn't need me to say yes." Thomas's jaw tightened. "He went out to Sweetwater the next week and found your father worse than me, and told him the same soft story about mercy and paperwork he told you this morning. Your father signed your name to spare you the choosing. He thought he was buying you $81 apiece, Hannah. He didn't understand he was handing Greaves the key to my water and your rock both in one stroke. By the time I heard of it, the entry was made and your father was in the ground." "Then it's a fraud," Hannah said, "an entry made by sick men on a marriage that never happened. We can undo it." "With what court?" Renfrew's laugh became a cough that bent him double. When it passed, he wiped his mouth and looked at her with those sharp, dying eyes. 90 miles to a judge who plays cards with Greaves on the 2nd Tuesday of every month. The ledger is the law. You heard him say it. And here's the cruelty of it. The entry's no fraud you can undo. It's a marriage that hasn't happened yet. A promise on paper, and a promise on paper, in a country with no courthouse, is exactly as true as the day a body chooses to make it true, or chooses not to. That's the one loose thread in his whole tidy weave. A wedding written is not a wedding made. Hannah understood him then, and the understanding sat her down hard in the mother's chair. It was a hole in the floor of his scheme, and it had her name on it. "If we marry," she said slowly, "truly marry, the land joins under us, not under your debt and my father's, as one household." "And a widow inherits," Renfrew said quietly. "A married widow holds the deed clean against any prior note, under the homestead law, if the proving's done and the marriage is sound. I've a year to live if the spring is kind. Likely less. Greaves wrote you into his book to steal everything you have left. I'm asking you to let him think he won, and let the very same words he forged turn the key the other way. You're asking me to marry a dying man for his land. I'm asking you to marry a dying man, so his land doesn't fall to the one who means to erase your father's memory, along with mine." Thomas Renfrew looked at her steadily, no plea in it, only the plain truth a dying man can afford to tell. "I get nothing but the dignity of choosing where my 40 years of water goes when I'm gone. You'd get 400 acres, the best in the county, and the satisfaction, if you've a taste for it, and I think you have, of making Silas Greaves eat his own ledger. I'll not pretend it's a clean thing to ask. I'm asking it anyway. I've run out of clean choices, same as your father did. It is a strange thing to be proposed to by a dying stranger on a stolen afternoon, with the man's enemy already holding the deed to your grave." Hannah did not answer that day. She lay awake that night in the cold room that had been Renfrew's mother's, weighing it the way her father had taught her to weigh a seed contract. Every clause turned to the lamp. The smiling word held longest of all. She turned Greaves's polished story to the light and found the rot in it. She turned Thomas Renfrew's bitter one, and found no rot at all, only a man with nothing left to gain by lying. The only snare she could find by dawn was her own heart, and there was nothing to do about that but go on. She came out onto the porch at first light. Thomas was already there, wrapped in his blankets, the dog at his knee. "Well, Miss Ainslie," he said, not turning, "you've a face like a woman who's read the contract through." "Twice," Hannah said. "I'll marry you, Thomas Renfrew, with my eyes open and on 2 conditions." "Name them." "First, I run this place while you're living, not for you, with you. You'll teach me the water, and I'll work it, and when Greaves comes calling, he'll find a working farm, not a deathbed he can foreclose around." A light came into the wasted face. "And the second?" "When it's done, and the land's mine and clean, your name goes on the records beside mine, not under it. You're not a line in his ledger any more than I am. You're the man who taught me the head gates. Let the county read that for the next 100 years." Thomas Renfrew was quiet a long moment. Then he put out his thin hand, and she took it, and they shook on it the way her father had shaken on every honest deal of his life, once, firm, eyes level. "Your father," Thomas said, "would be proud enough to bust." She married Thomas Renfrew 11 days later, in the front room of the stone house, before a circuit preacher and 2 hired witnesses and the old blue heeler. She wore her mother's locket and her own plain navy dress. The groom stood with the help of a cane and made it through his vows and laughed, really laughed for the first time she had seen, when the preacher pronounced them, because the joke of it was so large and so bitter and so good. Then they went to work, the 2 of them, on the thing Greaves had not counted on. A dying man and a debt girl, proving up 400 acres against a clock. Thomas could not stand for more than an hour, but he could sit in the doorway of the barn and tell her how his father had run the water, which gates to open in what order, so the creek fed every field by gravity, the knowledge of 40 years poured into the one spring he had left. The first morning at the head gate she did it wrong, and he made her do it wrong on purpose, so she would learn it in the muscle and not the ear. "Open the upper board first," he called from his chair on the bank. She heaved the cedar plank from its slot, and the creek surged past her boots and ran fast and useless, straight down the main ditch and out the far end, watering nothing but the road. "Now you've fed the county," Thomas said. "Drop it back, half a hand's width. The water's lazy, Hannah. It'll take the easy road every time, unless you make the easy road go where you want it." She wedged the board down by half a hand. The creek slowed, pooled, then crept sideways into the lateral ditches she had cut, and went looking for the low fields like a thing remembering its way home. She watched the dry grass go dark with wet. "My father never had water," she said. 40 years of rock. If he'd seen this run, he'd have wept." "He did see it," Thomas said quietly. "Sat right where you're standing. That's how this started, Hannah. He stood in my green field and said, 'My girl could make something of ground like this.' He didn't mean a marriage. He meant you." She did the standing after that, all of it. The head gates and the cedar fence and the bottom hay, the order of the boards and the set of the laterals, until she could run the whole 400 acres by the feel of the water against her ankles in the dark. But the work was not the only clock. The homestead filing had to be made at the county seat before the note came due, which Thomas reckoned came no later than midsummer, in her lawful married name, or every furrow she turned was a furrow turned for Silas Greaves. So she counted. 61 days, the morning after the wedding. She drove a nail into the barn door frame and notched it each dusk, and watched the open wood below the marks shrink. 61, then 50, then 40, crowding toward a line she had drawn in pencil and labeled in her crossed flourish hand, Greaves. The proving had to be filed before the wood ran out. It nearly didn't. The first test came not from Greaves, but from the creek. In the 3rd week of May, the water that ran year-round began, impossibly, to fall. A hand's width, lower against the cedar at dawn, lower by noon, and by the 2nd day the laterals were running thin and the new grass had stopped going dark. "It's the upper place," Thomas said when she told him. His face had gone grayer than the sickness made it. "Somebody's pulled water above us. There's an old diversion gate a mile up on the bend. My father built it 40 years back and kept it shut when we made peace with the Mercers upstream. Open that gate and you bleed half our flow into the dry coulee, and there's not a court in 90 miles would call it a crime. Just a neighbor watering his own." "Greaves doesn't have a place upstream." "No," Thomas said, "but Greaves holds paper on every man who does. You don't need to own the land, Hannah. You only need to own the man who owns it." He looked at the falling creek and then at her, and there was an apology in it. "I can't ride up there. I can't sit a horse a mile. If that gate's open, it stays open unless—" "Unless I go shut it," Hannah said. She rode the bay up the bend at first light, a spade and a crowbar lashed behind the saddle, the heeler running ahead. She found the old diversion gate exactly where he'd said, the capboard pried off and flung in the weeds, the creek pouring through the gap and away down the dry coulee into ground that drank it and grew nothing. And she found a man sitting his horse beside it, a heavy, slow-faced man she did not know, watching the water run to waste with the patience of someone being paid to. "Morning," the man said. He did not get down. "You'd be the Renfrew woman, the debt girl." "I'd be Hannah Renfrew. That's my water you're spilling." "Mercer water," the man said comfortably. "Old Mercer Gate. Mr. Mercer's got a right to open his own gate, and I'm hired to see it stays open. Nothing crooked about a man taking his own water, ma'am. You can ride to the county seat and ask, only it's a long ride, and the creek don't wait." It was the same shape of answer Greaves had given her in the office. Lawful on its face, rotten underneath, built to make her tired enough to quit. And Hannah recognized it. "Mr. Mercer capped this gate himself 40 years back, and made his peace with the Renfrews. He's an old man now, and a fair one. So I don't think it's Mr. Mercer who pried that cap off in the dark. I think it's a note Mr. Mercer owes the bank in Cottonwood, and a banker who told him to look the other way for a fortnight. Am I close?" The slow face did not change, but the eyes did. The flicker of a man whose script has run out a line early. "I wouldn't know about notes, ma'am." "No, I don't suppose you would." And she got down off the bay, took the crowbar from behind the saddle, and walked to the gate. "I wouldn't do that," the man said, and now he did get down, slow, a big man making himself bigger. "That's another man's gate." "It's a gate on the public water," Hannah said, fitting the bar under the open board, "and I'm shutting it. You can watch a woman do an honest day's work, or you can lay a hand on me, out here, a mile from any soul, with no witness but a half-blind dog. And if you do, mister, you'd best do it certain, because I buried my father in February and married a dying man in March, and I have got exactly nothing left that I'm afraid to lose. Which is it?" The healer had stopped trotting. It stood between Hannah and the heavy man, with its gray hackles up, and a low sound coming out of it that had nothing of the old porch dog in it. The man looked at the dog, and at the woman with the crowbar, and at the long empty miles where no one was paying him enough to be alone with either, and he did the arithmetic that bullies do. "Mr. Mercer can shut his own gate," he said, mounting up. "I just watch it." And he rode off down the coulee the way the wasted water went. Hannah threw her whole back into the bar. The board came free. She muscled it into its slot and packed the gap with sod and stone the way Thomas had taught her to seal a lateral, until the diversion choked and died, and the creek, robbed for 2 days, came swinging back into its proper channel with a sound like a held breath let go. She knelt in the mud and watched it run home, and the dog pressed its head against her shoulder, and she let it. When she rode back down at dusk, the low fields were going dark again with wet. Thomas was on the porch where she had left him, upright in his blankets, and he had counted the hours, she could tell, the way she counted the notches. "It's shut," she said, swinging down. "Mercer's man won't be back. He was hired, not loyal. Hired men don't stay where the pay turns dangerous." Thomas Renfrew looked at his wife, mud to the elbows, the crowbar still in her fist, and his eyes were wet in a way the cough had never made them. "Greaves thinks he married me to a debt girl, Hannah. He married me to the wrong woman entire." She filed the proving papers 9 days later, drove the wagon 2 days to the county seat, and entered every furrow and gate and rod of cedar fence the homestead law required in her own married name, in her own crossed flourish hand, so that no ledger anywhere could ever again say she had not signed. The clerk dated it and stamped it. She rode home and pulled the nail from the barn door frame, because there were notches to spare below the line marked Greaves, and she did not need to count any more. But before Greaves himself came, his sneer came, in Orville Pike's voice. She heard it the next time she went into Cottonwood for nails and lamp oil. The town had decided she was the debt girl who'd married a corpse for a deed, and Orville said it loudest, leaning in the mercantile door so the whole street could enjoy him. "There she is," Orville announced, to no one and everyone, as she tied the bay. "The Iron Springs widow in waiting, burying a man for his bottom land. How's the groom keeping, missus? Still above ground, or you out shopping for the funeral already?" The street laughed the way streets do, the safe, herd laugh of people glad it isn't them. But she had shut a gate against a paid man with her own hands, and a woman who has done that does not let a clerk have the last word in front of a town. She walked straight up to Orville Pike, close enough that he had to stop leaning, and pitched her voice clear so the whole street got every word. "Mr. Pike, you read my account out loud to this town in April. Only fair I read you something back." She drew the folded proving receipt from her coat. She had carried it on purpose. Proving complete. 400 acres at Iron Springs, filed in the lawful married name of Hannah Renfrew. Now you read aloud the same way you did to me the date I filed. Orville's eyes went to the paper and would not come back up. "I don't see as how—" "Read the date." He read it, because the street was watching now the way it had watched her in the bank. "May the 31st. And the note comes due?" A long pause. "Midsummer. he said very quietly. 8 days before the note comes due, Hannah said to the street, not to him. So when the bank tells you the debt girl married a corpse for nothing, for a deed she'll never hold, you'll know they made that story up in April and never read it to the end, the same as they told me. She folded the receipt away. I came to bury a debt. I stayed to bury a lie. Good morning, Mr. Pike. Mind the door. The street did not laugh. The thread woman, standing in the mercantile shadow with a paper of pins in her hand, smiled, a small, fierce, private smile, the smile of a woman who has spent her own life being read wrong in a single morning. Orville Pike did not smile. He went back inside and did not lean in the door again the whole rest of that summer. Silas Greaves came to Iron Springs himself in late June in a hired buggy, the note in his soft, clean hands. He had not believed the talk, and that was his mistake. He had built so much of his life on what a girl with $43 could not do that he had forgotten to ride out and look. He found a working farm, fields green and gated, the hay up in good stacks, the cedar fence sound, the laterals running silver in the afternoon light, and a young woman on the porch with a ledger of her own. He climbed down slower than he meant to. He had expected a deathbed. He had got a harvest. Miss Ainsley, he said. Mrs. Renfrew, Hannah said. She did not get up. The soft hand stilled on the note. I beg your pardon? You wrote the name yourself. The bank owns the spelling of it. Renfrew, you may use it. Greaves recovered. He had recovered from worse rooms than this. He came to the foot of the porch steps and laid the note flat on the rail between them. The note comes due on Renfrew's death, he said. Whatever pretty farming you've done, and it is pretty, you've a gift I didn't reckon on. The land falls to the bank the day he stops breathing. A note is a note, missus. You've worked a summer for me, and the improvements will fetch a better price at auction than the deathbed I expected. The note comes due on a single man's death, Hannah said. And now she rose and set the first receipt on the rail beside his note. You wrote it that way yourself. The note falls due on the death of Thomas Renfrew, unmarried, last of his name, with no heir to hold it against you. That was the whole of your scheme, a man with nobody. But my husband is not a single man, and he is not without an heir. A second receipt joined the first. We married in March, before a circuit preacher and 2 witnesses, and the record's filed. The marriage is sound. That entry was never meant to... He stopped himself. Too late. The oil had run out. To be true, Hannah finished for him quietly, the way you finish a sentence for a man who has lost the breath for it. I know. You wrote a wedding you meant to bury, a thing already done, so you'd never have to wonder if it would come true. But you can't write a wedding half true, Mr. Greaves. It's a door or it's nothing, and a door swings both ways. A third receipt. The provings filed 400 acres in my lawful married hand 8 days before your note comes due, and a widow holds her homestead clean against any prior note. The same Homestead Act you leaned on to write a marriage into your book. When my husband dies, this land does not fall to your bank. It falls to me, whole, watered, and clean. Silas Greaves looked at the 3 receipts on the rail, and then at the green fields running silver behind her, and a man who has spent 30 years reading ledgers can read a closed account when it is laid in front of him. The flicker she had seen in his office came back into the soft, clean hands, and this time it did not smooth away. You shut the Mercer gate, he said, and it was not pleasant any more. on the public water. There's no court in 90 miles would call it a crime. You taught me that yourself the first morning, though you meant it the other way round." She came down one step toward him, and for the first time she was looking down at him. "You signed my name to steal my water. You should have read your own contract before you signed it. The trap is never in the loud print, Mr. Greaves. It's in the line, 'A clever man thinks no one will ever turn around and read back to him.' He had no entry for that. There was no line in any book where a powerful man writes down the moment he is beaten by his own careful hand. He folded the note back into his coat, slowly, the way you fold a thing you no longer believe in. My father signed that name to spare me a choice." Hannah said into his silence, "You signed it to take everything I had. The hand was the same, the heart wasn't. You should have remembered that before you bought a dying man's water and a dead man's daughter." She nodded toward the buggy. "It's a long road back to Cottonwood. You'll want to start before the heat." He climbed into the hired buggy, and the Gila stood at the foot of the steps and watched him go without a sound, and the dust closed behind the wheels, and the porch was quiet again, and that was the last the creek bottom ever saw of Silas Greaves. Thomas Renfrew lived until the first hard frost. He saw the hay come in. He saw the water run every field by gravity the way his father had shown him, and he saw his wife, for she was truly that by then, in the long, quiet way that has nothing to do with ledgers, stand straight-backed in a country that had named her a fool and proven her the sharpest hand in it. The last clear evening before the cough took the rest of him, he had her wheel his chair to the porch rail to watch the laterals run silver one more time. "You kept your second condition," he said. "Renfrew beside Ainsley, not under it." "Always beside," Hannah said. "Then I die a man with his name kept, and not a line in Silas Greaves's book." He found her hand. "Your father knew what he was doing when he stood in my green field. He couldn't leave you water, so he left you the woman who could take it. He died in the stone room that had been his mother's, with the locket-wearing woman holding one hand and the old blind dog's head on his knee, and he was not afraid, because he had spent his last year putting his house in order, and he had found the right person to leave it to. He left her the 400 acres and the water and his name. She kept all three. Hannah Renfrew lived another 51 years on the creek bottom at Iron Springs. She joined the rocky Ainsley 42 at last, so the two parcels her father had dreamed of joining became one good farm under one steady hand, and the water her father never had ran down to the rock and made it green. She never remarried. She kept her own ledgers in a careful slanting script, and any neighbor in trouble could come and have a debt entered against the next good harvest. No interest, no marriage, no fine print waiting in the dark. And many did, in the dry years, and she never foreclosed on a single one. The blue Gila is buried under the wild plum by the porch. So is the man who taught her the head gates. So, in time, was she. There is a line in the records office at the county seat, in a married woman's confident hand, that closes the account, a forged entry opened, and beside it, where the old bank ledger once held a name she never wrote, there is now nothing at all, because the bank failed in the panic, and its books were burned, and the only name that survived was the one she earned. A debt is only a number until a hand decides what it means. She had come to erase a name and stayed to make one worth keeping. So tell me, before you go, if a powerful man had signed your name into his book to take everything you had left, would you have torn the page out and walked away from it? Or would you have done what Hannah did and turned his own careful words into the key that locked him out? If this story stayed with you, leave a word below. And if you have ever been written off by a whole town in a single morning, told who you were before you ever opened your mouth, tell me about the day you proved them wrong. And if you want another story about the quiet ones the frontier underestimated and lived to respect, there's one waiting for you right here.